Hey, this is Brad Dyke saying hi. I hope that everybody's doing good. And this is my conceptual operations video. This is for those out there who, they're not as big of a group as you hardware nerds and nerdettes, but they're out there too. So I do these on occasion just to give insight about doing operations, give insight about IT operations, and this time we're talking about cycling rotation of software releases. Now, this is a major problem for us, and it's a major problem for every company. And the way you get over this, and let me describe the environment first to you, and then I'll describe the fix for it, is what's happening is the life cycle of software is diminished considerably. It used to be every couple of years, exponential value 0.2 kicked in, and it went from a couple of years to no less than 2 years, and then from 2 years to 1 year, and then from 1 year to 6 months, and then from 6 months to to 2 months, and from 2 months down to 4 weeks, and so on and so on. So what does that mean? Well, if you're in operations and you're using Linux as your core environment for your production environments, or you have pseudo Windows environment mixes as well, which is the most optimal, personally, in my opinion, is you take the best of Windows and you take the best of Linux and you put them together, and it gives you a lot more than either one separately. But the key thing is the life cycle. It's a challenge, because what ends up happening is, and it's usually predicated more on the security vulnerability part than it is on new innovations of software. So what that basically means is that within 2 weeks you can see significant requests for updates in your Linux environment, probably up to 6 weeks when it comes to Windows, and it affects on scale. I mean, it's quite a bit, and you're downloading quite a few files, and they're updating and they're swapping and replacing them, and they're usually driven by vulnerabilities. And this is getting faster and faster. Back in the old days when we used things like Update Service or WISE, which is Windows Microsoft Update Services, and other functional update processes, including Tivoli, it was sporadic, 2 or 3 times a year. Today we do it monthly, and it's not fast enough. And that's a challenge. So with that being said, in operations, what you have to do first is go to the MSA agreement. That's your master service agreement for your customer base, and learn what you have to meet. If the verbiage in your MSA agreement for your customers says something you can't accomplish, then put in a request to augment it so it can be accomplished. Don't reach an unreachable goal. It's not realistic. Be pragmatic and be practical. That's the first piece of advice I tell you as an IT director, or an operations director, or an SRE director of processes and so on. The key thing here is that you need to make sure that you understand the nature of this beast. Break it down to its components. Qualify and quantify them, and then look at the quality versus quantity that you're receiving. Which means bleeding edge doesn't work all the time, but it's getting closer and closer and closer, so it's getting harder to determine. So what we do to address this problem is we put in a process and we restrict it to a 30-day window. First things first. Secondly, we set up deployment windows on a weekly basis for giving code operations and our DevOps teams the ability to deploy in structured windows. There are also, on rare occasions, we have what we call active deployments, which don't fall into those windows, but are not considered viable updates that would protect or impact production in any way, shape, or form. So their rules are different than production. Most of the time, the 30-day rule only applies to production, because you have to do that. Next thing we did is we began structuring quarterly stages for crucial services like database management, and your primary control services, in our case PHP, right? Or in this case you're dealing with web controllers, and so therefore you're using Apache or Nginx, which is not an advisable thing, by the way. The point is, you might have it all. And by setting up quarterly windows, you can give yourself the ability to breathe Everybody has an expectation. Everybody's expecting the updates at those windows, but nothing more. That's the secret. That's what you need to have. They need to see clearly that you're on top of it, but you're doing it pragmatically with structure and symmetry to it. You will always have 911 emergencies and ultra-high vulnerabilities, so you create yourself what's called a deployment emergency policy guideline, and that's only authorized by the director of operations and his subordination to his leadership. In other words, either to the next level up director or to the VP of operations. And it's a rare occurrence, but it's there. If it's needed, we can do it. Not a problem. So you set yourself up effectively. Now the next thing you do is your process of deployment. Manual processes do not work. Go to automated. If you're multi-cloud hybrid static environments, then you're going to have to go multi-tiered operations with automation. That means whatever works for Google, GSP, and their subservices inside, you have to use those. But you have to do exactly the same thing to the other cloud provider you have. Let's say it's, Azure. Microsoft Azure. They have their own guidelines. It's the same standing as what they have in other cloud providers. And then you go, let's say you want to go to AWS. They also have SSM for doing security updates, and so on and so on. But you have to do the automation process. You'll still find yourself working from 7 or 10 or 6 in the afternoon, evening, all the way to 2 or 3 in the morning at the beginning. But it gets better, because as you go through this, you begin to SOP your process, which you must do. Then you do what's called a playbook, and the playbook gives your 1, 2, 3s to get you through every step through the process. And then later you do enhancements that can allow you to do what's called concurrency deployments. In other words, more than one at a time. So you can do 2, 6, 10 at a time, depending if you've got 100, 400, or 1,000, instances you have to update or containers you have to update. It's applicable also for containerization, but you want to use something similar to a Terraform and Ansible or a Puppet model structure with your CI/CD engines, which will execute those values in an effective mannerism until you get to such a big size that you might want to look at Kubernetes to do the oversight capacity for that. But you also need an orchestrator. And the orchestrator is designed to put in the stopping points and starting points and approval factors that you need to have in place to make the due diligence happen, so that everybody's checking all their I's and their T's to make sure they're dotted and crossed. So with that being said, operations is the most critical function because they're the ones keeping the lights on 24/7. But their DevOps component inside that team, is the one that does the continuous integration and redistribution of new updates. We call that CI/CD. With that process and they going through their 1, 2, 3s, operations counters the DevOps environments and takes over what they finished and do the maintenance and maintain those environments until the next go around. Hence homogeneous integration, and that is your quote-unquote cloud ops, or your DevOps, if you want to call it that. Whatever version of ops it's going to be called, no one really knows. That title keeps changing. It's so ridiculously funny. But basically, in a nutshell, it's your operations. So, with that being said, it's a progressive process. Now, here comes the next thing. Application injection effect. Application injection effect means that you're bringing in a brand new component that's going to be layered in with your existing components, or you have the subtraction of an application deployment that needs to leave your system in a pragmatic and very effective migration, so it has no impacts on anything and it's transitioned to whatever the next application is. Or you have both. This guy's coming in to do these things while this guy is being retired and getting rid of those things. Those are your 3 basic primary models that you're dealing with. And because you're dealing with those, you're going to have 3 core values in that equation. 1, make sure whatever's coming into the door does not come in without a deployment model and a roadmap to its final, hopefully, HA availability deployment standing. In other words, whoever is bringing it in needs to do due diligence planning to show you all the steps and resource requirements and everything that needs to be done to make it successful. Because you want to make your engineering team successful, because if you do that, then you're successful. You want to support them 100%. Don't be aggravating. Don't come across in a negative way. Just be a positive force and offer those resources. And yeah, unfortunately, depending on the criticality, it might break some of your upstanding daily and monthly rules, and you'll have to plan post-action items to clean that up later so that it's in the same kind of guideline of everything else is getting periodically updated. Now, the thing about migrations and transitions, which is different than the introduction of a new application, is the due diligence of notification and communication. This is crucial. When you're taking something away from the customers and they don't know about it, and they say, hey, I paid for that, they're right. But if you tell them that, hey, we're having to phase this out to keep costs in control, if not, then we're going to have to increase your bill cost because you're still using this old protocol and you haven't taken the steps to get it to the latest standards in security accessing of your platform. They say, good point, let me help you get us off of that. And suddenly they're helping you. Now, this is not an easy process at best. You have your support teams, you have the teams that are there to make the customer successful, and of course you have your internal operations and your code teams to decommission those steps and get things taken out of the process while you're maintaining a communication between 10 to 500 customers. And you have to reach out to all of them, and they all have to reach back out to you and say, we got it. That's why it's important to be able to get to your discovery teams, your delivery teams, your customer support teams, and let them get you where you need to go and help you communicate what you need to communicate. And at that point stage, they act as your front-end people to get them off of those environments. And by the time you get the last of the people off, we can power the bad boy down, let it stay offline for 14 days, back it up one last time, and gone. Next. And you'll probably have a long line of next right behind that. So it's about efficiency in process. You can't drive everyone by your processes. Your processes have to be malleable and shapeable when the requirement requires it. So remember that too. Be forgiving. Be, lighten up on the rules. If you got everybody on the same page, including your CHTP or whatever new executive orders or titles are out there, we're all on the same page. So let's do it. Let's get it done, and let's do it pragmatically. Do always a lessons learned after any form of deployment or retirement or introduction. That's what gives you the ability to speed things up in the next go-around. The better and more efficient you do these, the more you can do with less. Because inevitably, as companies grow, so does the quantity of employees that are needed to do things, and this helps change that equation to a certain degree. But this is Brad Dyke. I hope you enjoyed this operations and DevOps discussion. It's an important detail, and I don't see nearly enough talking out there in the YouTube world about these kind of things. I see a lot of technology-driven seminars and things like that, but I'm talking about people like myself and others like me just talking about the daily grinds and lessons learned, and share your real-time knowledge as a mentor to everyone else out there so that they understand where you're coming from. Make sure you also propose your video in such a way so it's clearly defined as IT operations and in DevOps, or CI/CD in DevOps, or DevOps and this, or some type of verbiage that talks to the nature of managing these resources, not necessarily the technology itself. But with that being said, this is Brad Dyke signing off. God bless and have a great week. Take care, guys.